Thank you for listening to our channel. Don't forget to like and comment and subscribe if you haven't already. It helps our channel immensely. And now, for the feature presentation, The Tarot Murders at Wraithmoor Hall. Chapter 1. An Invitation to Wraithmore. The letter arrived on a chill November morning, its parchment heavy, scented faintly of lavender and wood smoke. Jane Parsons, private investigator of some quiet renown among England's upper circles, found it nestled among more mundane correspondence on her breakfast table at her modest yet tastefully appointed London flat. Her assistant, Mr. Aldwych, had placed the silver tray before her with his usual precision. The Daily Telegraph, a note from her tailor, and the invitation stood out starkly among the rest. It was sealed with a thick red wax stamp bearing the distinctive emblem of Wraithmoor Hall, a serpent coiled around a chalice. She studied it a moment, fingers tapping thoughtfully on her teacup. "Another society matter, I presume," Aldwych observed mildly. Jane, tall and composed in a dove-grey morning coat, slit the envelope open and read aloud. "My dear Miss Parsons, I hope you will forgive this most abrupt and unusual letter. I write to you not in jest nor vanity, but from a most profound sense of dread. My family estate, Wraithmoor Hall, has of late been troubled by peculiar happenings, strange lights, dreadful visions, and a prediction that death shall soon visit us. The one who foretold this is Madame Virel, a woman of rare talent in the divinatory arts. Last week, during a reading, she drew the death card for me. Since then, I have heard whispers, footsteps at midnight, and shadows where none should be. I believe I am in grave danger. This weekend, I am hosting several guests at Wraithmore. I implore you to join us, not as a guest, but in your capacity as an investigator. Should this all prove to be nothing more than old stone playing tricks on the mind, I shall feel foolish, but safe. Please accept this invitation in confidence. The motor shall await you at Paddington Station on Friday, 3 o'clock sharp. With deepest urgency, Lady Elowyn Ashcombe." Jane read the final words twice, her brow slightly raised. Lady Ashcombe was not unknown to her, once the radiant hostess of London's most enviable soirees, now a recluse of sorts. Her retreat to the crumbling grandeur of Wraithmore after the sudden death of her husband had been the subject of more than one speculative column. Tarot cards, death omens, and a caste of aristocrats tucked away in a centuries-old manor on the Devonshire moors. How quaint. Chapter 2. Cards on the Table. By Saturday morning the house had filled. Wraithmoor Hall, once so quiet, now hummed with restrained conversation, clinking silverware, and the rustle of silk gowns and tailored suits. The air carried the faint mingling scents of pipe tobacco, lilies and old paper, a peculiar cocktail of the upper crust and ancient decay. Jane Parsons, ever observant, had taken breakfast alone in the conservatory. From her vantage point, she had watched the other guests arrive, some with pomp, others with quiet wariness. By noon, introductions had been made, and Lady Ashcombe had gathered the company in the red drawing-room, a richly appointed chamber with ruby velvet curtains, a black marble hearth, and gold-leaf cherubs along the cornices. A fire roared in the grate. Lady Ashcombe stood near the hearth, her hands clasped before her. "My friends," she began, "thank you for coming on such short notice. I hope your journey was pleasant. I have gathered you here not only for companionship, but because I believe something dreadful is coming to Wraithmore. Perhaps it is already here." The guests exchanged uncertain glances. Among them was Sir Cedric Hawthorne, a retired naval commander, broad-shouldered with a booming voice and thick white moustache. Vera Chillingham, a cynical dowager of 70 with piercing eyes and a tongue sharper than any sabre. Mr. Ambrose Vale, a young politician with impeccable tailoring, perfectly parted hair, and a manner both charming and evasive. Clara Ashcombe, Lady Elowin's niece, barely 20 and pale as moonlight, with delicate features and hands that fidgeted constantly with her locket. Dr. Edmund Greaves, a quiet, beady-eyed academic who taught philosophy at Cambridge and wore tweed. And lastly, Madame Virel, the tarot reader, a Frenchwoman of ambiguous age and commanding presence, dressed entirely in black, with silver bangles that chimed softly as she moved. Lady Ashcombe gestured to her. Madame Virel is a guest of mine, and a woman of uncommon insight. Some of you may scoff, but I have seen her gifts first-hand. Last week she performed a reading, and the death card appeared. For me. At that, a few guests stiffened. Sir Cedric cleared his throat loudly. A bit theatrical, isn't it, Elowin? Surely we're not giving weight to parlour tricks. Madame Virel smiled, serene and unoffended. L'amour, sir, does not always signify a physical death. It may mean transformation, endings, or beginnings. Or parlour nonsense, muttered Vera. Lady Ashcombe ignored the jibes. Tonight, I have asked Madame Virel to perform a reading for us all, not as entertainment, but to reveal whatever darkness may be hanging over this house. Jane, sitting quietly in a high-backed armchair near the window, folded her hands over one knee. She said nothing, but her eyes missed no detail. The tremor in Clara's fingers, the way Ambrose Vale's smile faltered slightly at the mention of death, how Madame Virel's eyes rested on each guest a moment too long. That evening, the red drawing-room was transformed. A round oak table was placed at the centre, and the chandelier dimmed to a ghostly glow. Candles were lit in tall iron sconces. Heavy drapes were drawn shut, and a faint scent of sandalwood wafted through the air. Madame Virel sat at the table, her tarot deck laid out before her, ancient-looking cards with dark backs and gilt edges. She motioned for the guests to sit in a semicircle, and one by one she invited them to come forward. "Let the cards speak," she intoned. "Whether you believe or not, they do not lie." Jane watched carefully as each person approached. Some laughed nervously. Others appeared truly uneasy. Sir Cedric drew the tower, followed by the chariot and the lovers. "A fall from grace," Madame Virel murmured, "followed by a great test. You are not done with battles, mon capitaine." "Rubbish," he said, but he looked unsettled. Clara Ashcombe drew the moon, the hanged man, and the devil. Madame Virel stared at the cards a long time. "You are not free, child. You are bound, by blood or by secrets." Clara burst into tears and had to be led away by a footman. Then came Lady Ashcombe. The room fell still. Even the fire crackled more quietly. She drew 3 cards with a trembling hand. The first, death. The second, the wheel of fortune. The third, death again. A sharp breath escaped someone's lips. The same card, twice. "That is not possible," whispered Dr. Greaves. Madame Virel looked genuinely shaken. "There should be only one death card in the deck," she said. She turned the rest of the deck face up and rifled through. There were 2 death cards. "No," she said softly. This is not right. This is a warning." A cold silence fell upon the room. The candle flames flickered violently, as though disturbed by some invisible hand. Vera Chillingham muttered a prayer under her breath. Jane rose quietly from her seat and crossed to Madame Virel's side. "May I see the deck?" The fortune-teller hesitated, then nodded. Jane examined the cards expertly, her detective's eye noting their worn edges, the slightly different inkwork on the second death card. A duplicate, slipped in deliberately. She looked up. "Who else has handled your deck, madame?" "No one. I keep it in my room, always in a silk pouch." "Is the room locked?" "No." Then someone has tampered with it. A ripple of murmuring rose. Lady Ashcombe looked stricken. But why? Why frighten me? Jane's gaze swept across the assembled guests. Someone had taken the time to insert a second death card into a fortune-teller's deck. Someone wanted fear, chaos, misdirection. She felt it then, not the presence of ghosts or spirits, but the first breath of something darker, not superstition, murder. At dawn the next morning, a scream shattered the stillness of Wraithmoor Hall. Sir Cedric Hawthorne was found dead in the library, a blade through the chest, and placed delicately upon his waistcoat, like a final signature, was the death card. Chapter 3. The Haunting Past of Wraithmore. The death of Sir Cedric Hawthorne sent Wraithmoor Hall into a hush so profound it seemed even the ancient stone walls held their breath. Jane Parsons stood in the library doorway, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. Sir Cedric had been seated in one of the heavy wing-back chairs, a book fallen beside him. His eyes were wide open in surprise or pain, and a thin-bladed letter opener protruded from his chest. Resting with eerie precision on his torso was the Death Tarot card, the same one that had appeared at the séance the night before. Number not, the same one. Jane stepped closer, careful not to touch anything. This card was newer, less worn than the others in Madame Virel's deck. Whoever had left it here had come prepared. Lady Elowyn stood behind her, shivering despite her heavy dressing gown. "This is madness," she whispered. "Who would do such a thing? Sir Cedric was a fool at times, yes, but he was hardly—" Jane turned. "Was there any tension between him and the other guests?" Elowyn hesitated. "He had words with Madame Virel, of course. He said her readings were nonsense, but no more than any sceptic. He and Vera Chillingham have known each other since childhood, bickered for years, but never more than that. He hardly knew Clara or Ambrose." "Where did he sit after the tarot reading ended?" "He went straight for the brandy. Typical Cedric. Then he vanished, though I assumed he had gone to bed. Edmund said he heard someone moving through the halls around 2, but thought nothing of it." Jane nodded slowly. "Then I should speak with Dr. Greaves and Madame Virel again." By mid-morning, the local constable, a ruddy-cheeked and clearly overwhelmed man named Pym, had arrived. He accepted Jane's presence with relief. Word of her reputation had clearly reached even the Devonshire countryside. "I'd not know where to start, Miss Parsons," he confessed. "Stabbed in the heart, no sign of struggle, and a card laid on the chest, like a calling card." "It is a calling card," Jane said, "one designed to frighten and to mislead." She spent the morning questioning the guests. Clara Ashcombe, found crying quietly in the solarium, said she had not slept at all. I kept hearing things, Miss Parsons, soft sounds in the corridor outside my room, like someone walking in slippers, or pacing, but I was too frightened to leave. I thought perhaps it was Madame Virel, performing a ritual or something." "You knew Sir Cedric well?" She shook her head. "Only through Aunt Elowyn. He always frightened me a little. Vera Chillingham, in contrast, was unbothered." "Well, I told Elowyn this would happen," she said bluntly, pouring herself a cup of tea. "You invite charlatans and fools under one roof, and someone ends up skewered." "Did you have any argument with Sir Cedric?" "Last year at Ascot. He accused me of cheating at cards. I accused him of being an unrepentant libertine. We laughed about it the next day. He had a nasty temper, but no one hated him enough to do this. Not unless there's something more going on." Ambrose Vale, ever the polished gentleman, was seated in the music-room, gazing thoughtfully at a piano he clearly did not play. "It's shocking," he said, "tragic, but I can't say I'm surprised." "No? There was something in the air last night, after the reading, as if something cracked and let darkness in. Elowyn's house is, unnatural, no offence meant. Jane pressed on. Did you see anything? Hear anything? Only the storm, he replied smoothly, and a door creaking now and then. But Wraithmore is filled with noises, isn't it? Dr. Edmund Greaves was found in the library's far corner, pacing back and forth with his hands behind his back like a troubled schoolmaster. I didn't like him, he said when asked about Sir Cedric. A brute of a man, but murder. Number I couldn't stomach it. I heard someone in the hallway around 2 a.m. Light footsteps. I thought perhaps Lady Elowen was sleepwalking. Why her? She has habits. She's been known to drift through the halls at night, talking to herself. Interesting, Jane said. Madame Virel was the last to be questioned. Her hands trembled as she held her tea, but her voice remained calm. This was not meant to happen, she said. The death card is symbolic, but someone turned it literal. Jane sat across from her, studying the fine lines of her face, the careful arrangement of her shawl, the practised sorrow in her eyes. Where is your deck now? In my room. I have not touched it since last night. May I see it again? They returned to her chambers together. Jane examined the cards carefully. The duplicate death card was gone. Now only one, Madame Virel whispered, as it should be. Someone slipped a second into your deck, to unnerve Lady Ashcombe, or to create a performance. You think this is theatre? I think someone is hiding behind superstition and using it to distract. That evening, after the constable left to report to the yard, Jane wandered the halls of Wraithmore. The light had grown dim and golden, and the house groaned softly as if burdened by old memories. She paused in the long gallery, staring at a portrait of a stern-faced man in naval dress, Sir Cedric, 40 years younger. Beneath the painting was a small brass plaque, Sir Cedric Hawthorne, commissioned 1876, friend and ally to the Ashcombes. Something about that wording struck her. Not relative, not family friend, but ally. She turned, hearing a soft creak. Clara stood there, pale as paper. I've remembered something, she whispered. Something about Madame Virel. I saw her, weeks ago, in London, at a bookshop near Chelsea. She was arguing with a man. Who? I don't know, but she said something strange, something about setting the stage, and the man gave her a package wrapped in silk. Jane stepped forward. You're certain? Yes, I didn't think it mattered at the time, but now... Jane nodded slowly. Thank you, Clara. That may be very important indeed. As the house fell into uneasy silence that night, Jane returned to her room. But instead of sleeping, she sat at her writing desk, sketching a chart of relationships, motives, and timing. 2 things were becoming clear. Someone at Wraithmore was playing a game, and the first death was only the opening move. Chapter 4. Shadows and Suspicions. Rain fell steadily throughout the night, whispering against the windows of Wraithmoor Hall like 1,000 ghostly fingers. The grand house, once vibrant with conversation and the clinking of glasses, now sank into uneasy silence. The halls echoed with the sound of footsteps, real or imagined, and shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should. Jane Parsons did not sleep. Instead, she sat on the chair her room, the crackling fire at her feet, and a leather-bound notebook in her lap. The murder of Sir Cedric had upset the house's delicate social equilibrium. What had begun as a curiosity, whispers of tarot cards and omens, had evolved into something darker. The death card had not been drawn, it had been placed. Someone among the guests had used the symbolism of Madame Virel's tarot as both a threat and a smokescreen. Jane stared at the rows of names and annotations she had scribbled. She did not believe in coincidence, and she most certainly did not believe in ghosts. but she did believe in motive, and motives abounded. At breakfast the next morning, the mood was tense. The long dining table, once filled with lively chatter, now hosted only strained conversation and clinking cutlery. Lady Elowyn, seated at the head, was pale and distracted. She barely touched her eggs. "Isn't it strange," Vera Chillingham remarked, "how quickly one adjusts to murder? We all sleep, eat, and carry on, even while one of us may be a killer." "Is this helpful, Vera?" Ambrose Vale said, his usual charm slightly cracked. "Truth rarely is," she replied with a sniff. Jane's gaze swept the table. Clara had not come down. Madame Virel arrived late, her eyes red-rimmed and her shawl hanging askew. Dr. Greaves muttered something about the police returning later that afternoon. Only one chair sat conspicuously empty, Sir Cedric's. Jane placed her napkin on the table. "If you'll excuse me." She found Clara in the blue parlour, curled up on the settee with a blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. "I couldn't eat," the girl murmured. "I kept dreaming I saw him in the library again, his eyes open, that horrible card on his chest." Jane sat beside her. "Clara, you mentioned seeing Madame Virel in London, arguing with a man. Could you describe him?" Clara furrowed her brow. "Tall, gaunt, wore a hat, one of those wide-brimmed ones. He was angry, I remember that. But she seemed even angrier. I heard her say, 'You promised it would be clean. I don't want blood.' Then they noticed me watching, and she turned away." "Did she recognize you?" "I think so. She smiled afterward, but it wasn't friendly." Jane squeezed her hand. "Thank you. You've been very brave." By midday, the constable returned, this time with a detective from Scotland Yard, Inspector Galloway, a stern-faced man with thick brows and a voice like gravel. "I know of you, Miss Parsons," he said, extending a hand, "and I'd be a fool not to accept your help given the crowd we've got here." Jane appreciated the lack of posturing. Together they walked the halls discussing theories. Galloway believed the crime to be personal. Something in the way the body was arranged, as if it was meant to say something. "Then the message is hidden beneath performance," Jane replied. "The card, the reading, the fear, none of it is random. This is a carefully staged show." "Which makes me think we're not dealing with an impulsive killer." "Exactly." They agreed to interview the staff that afternoon, but the plan was interrupted by the arrival of a scream. It came from upstairs. The guests and staff converged at the end of the eastern corridor, just outside Madame Virel's room. A maid, white-faced and trembling, pointed inside. She wouldn't answer the door, so I opened it, and—" Jane pushed past gently and entered the room. Madame Virel lay sprawled on the carpet, her dark dress spread out like a pool of ink. Her eyes were closed, and her face was oddly serene. But she was dead. A fine trickle of blood ran from the corner of her mouth. On the dressing table nearby sat her deck of cards, scattered as if tossed. One card faced upward, the High Priestess. Inspector Galloway entered, frowning deeply. "Not a knife this time." "No," Jane murmured, kneeling. "Poison." She picked up a delicate porcelain teacup. Galloway swore under his breath. "2 murders in 2 days! Someone here is cleaning up after themselves." "Or silencing someone," Jane replied. Her gaze moved to the tarot deck. It had been arranged deliberately, she was sure of it. The High Priestess, the card of mystery, secrets, hidden knowledge. Was it a message, or just another layer of misdirection? She examined the cup more closely. A bitter almond smell. Cyanide. Fast-acting and accessible, particularly in an old estate with an apothecary cabinet, as most manors had. "She wasn't meant to die like this," Jane said aloud, almost to herself. "She was part of the act, a propriedad, but something shifted. She became a liability. Galloway looked grim. We'll search the rooms, everyone's luggage, question the staff again. Jane nodded. And speak to Clara once more. She may have known more than she realised. That evening, the atmosphere at Wraithmore was dark. No one gathered for dinner. The great halls echoed with footsteps, whispers, and the low creak of age-old timber. Jane found Lady Elowyn seated in the music room, staring out at the rain-soaked moors. "They say she poisoned herself," Elowyn murmured, "but I can't believe it. She was frightened, yes, but not suicidal." "She didn't take her own life," Jane said. "Someone wanted her quiet." Elowyn's hands trembled slightly. "I feel this house is cursed, Miss Parsons. Since my husband's death, I have felt it gathering around me, like a fog, something terrible." Jane glanced toward the grand piano. A single note had been struck recently, very faintly, as if a hand had rested there, unsure. "I don't believe in curses, Lady Ashcombe," she said gently. "I believe in people, and people are often far more dangerous." That night, Jane returned to her room and laid out the evidence. 2 deaths, one symbolic, one silenced. But then, at the edge of her thoughts, a thread tugged, a phrase. "You promised it would be clean. I don't want blood." Jane stood, a chill running through her. Madame Virel had been complicit in something, but the killer had broken their promise. There was someone in this house who wore 2 faces. Chapter 5. The Mask Behind the Mysticism. A thick fog rolled over the Devonshire moors the next morning. Inside the Grand Manor, the mood was subdued and grim. The death of Madame Virel, supposedly by her own hand, had sown as much confusion as it had fear. 2 deaths in 2 days, 2 very different methods. But Jane Parsons saw what others did not. They were part of the same design. She stood once more in the fortune-teller's room, now cleared of its occupant, her eyes slowly scanning the space. Nothing had been moved. Inspector Galloway had permitted her to examine it before the constables began their official search. The tarot deck was back in its velvet pouch. The tea set had been carefully lifted and labelled for analysis. A small leather-bound journal had been taken into evidence, but Jane had memorised its contents. It was a series of observations, written in Madame Virel's looping, slightly faded hand. Most of it was mundane. Thoughts about the guests. A peculiar fascination with Clara Ashcombe's aura. A drawing of the death card, scribbled several times over. But one line stood out, written just 4 days before her death. "He has arrived. I fear he no longer wishes to follow the plan." Later that morning, Jane requested a private meeting with Clara, who now seemed the most fragile thread in a rapidly unravelling tapestry. They sat in the library, the same place where Sir Cedric had died. Jane chose it deliberately. "I need you to be very honest with me, Clara," she began gently. "Did Madame Virel ever speak to you about your family?" Clara looked nervous, pulling the sleeves of her cardigan over her hands. "She said strange things sometimes, about legacies, curses. She asked about my father, who died when I was very young, but I thought it was just part of her theatrics." "Did she ever mention your uncle, Lady Elowyn's late husband?" Clara shook her head. "Only in passing. I never knew him well. He was distant, cold. I was never allowed to spend time alone with him." Jane paused. "Did he ever visit you, write to you?" Clara looked at her sharply. "No." "Are you certain?" A long silence. Then, hesitantly, "I did receive a letter once, a few years ago, from a solicitor. He said something about a trust in my name. I asked Aunt Elowyn, and she dismissed it immediately, said it was an old clerical error." "Would you recognise the name of that solicitor?" Clara nodded. "I still have the letter. It was Theodore Vale. Jane's heart skipped. Ambrose Vale. She found Ambrose in the gallery, admiring a faded oil painting of a fox hunt. "A beautiful house for all its gloom," he remarked when she joined him. "But it doesn't seem to like people very much. Do you feel it too?" "I feel something," Jane said. "Mostly that someone is lying to me." Ambrose smiled faintly. "Then you must be in very good company." "Tell me, Mr. Vale, do you know a solicitor named Theodore Vale?" He turned slowly. "He was my father." "I see. And did he, at any point, represent the Ashcombe family?" Ambrose looked at her with a peculiar expression, something between amusement and resignation. "My father handled many quiet matters for the gentry, including the Ashcombes. After Lord Ashcombe's death, I reviewed some of his older cases. That's how I came to know Elowen. She asked me to look into a particular clause in her late husband's will." Jane tilted her head. "Which clause?" "The one that named Clara Ashcombe the heir to the remainder of the Ashcombe estate, provided she married before her 21st birthday." Jane blinked. "She's 20. Ambrose nodded. "Precisely." "And what happens if she doesn't marry?" "The inheritance reverts to a separate trust, one that was quietly amended before Lord Ashcombe's death to benefit a former military associate." "Sir Cedric?" Ambrose gave a grim smile. "Yes." "So that was it. The money. Sir Cedric had motive, a financial one. If Clara married, he lost the fortune. If she did not, he gained. But now he was dead, which meant someone else had known about the arrangement, someone who planned for Sir Cedric to die, and perhaps Clara to marry. Jane's mind reeled. She asked carefully, "Were you ever engaged to Clara?" Ambrose hesitated. "Not formally. Lady Elowen hinted at the idea, quietly encouraged us to become closer, but I declined." "Why?" He looked at her directly. "Because I'm not in the business of coercion, and because Clara is not a pawn." Jane left him and went to the East Wing, where the estate's documents were kept in an old roll-top desk in Lord Ashcombe's private study. Lady Elowen had granted her permission, albeit reluctantly. There, Jane found the trust records. They confirmed Ambrose's account. If Clara were to marry before her 21st birthday, the estate passed to her. If not, it defaulted to an external party, Sir Cedric Hawthorne. The dates matched, the motives were solid, but that was not the most interesting part. Tucked behind the amended will was a letter, an unsigned, half-burned letter, but unmistakably in Lord Ashcombe's hand. She must never know. The girl's birth was the result of a mistake, one I paid for. Elowen raised her as her own, but the child is not hers. She is the daughter of Margot Vale, the governess. I owe her this trust, but no more. Jane's breath caught. Clara was not Lady Elowen's niece. She was her stepdaughter, and Ambrose Vale's half-sister. Everything changed in that moment. The layered facade of the house began to collapse in Jane's mind. The performances, the false familial ties, the vague mention of legacies and alliances. Sir Cedric had known. Madame Virel had discovered it, or been told, and someone had silenced them both. That evening, Jane called a quiet meeting with Inspector Galloway. "I believe I know what's happening," she said, "but I need you to do something for me." "What's that?" "Find out who retrieved the apothecary key from the butler's drawer, and check if any staff reported seeing someone in the East Wing on the night before Madame Virel's death." Galloway nodded. "You think this was planned well in advance?" "I think the killer knew exactly what they were doing, and now that 2 bodies have fallen, they may feel bold enough to strike again." "Who's next?" "That," Jane said, "depends entirely on who they think still knows the truth." That night, she left her door unlocked and her lamp dimmed. She sat silently in her armchair, notebook in hand, eyes fixed on the flickering flame. If her theory was right, the killer was calculating, precise, and capable of terrible calm. And the mask, the tarot cards, the omens, the dramatics, was only there to confuse. But Jane Parsons was no longer confused. She was waiting, and very soon she intended to unmask the killer in full view of everyone. Chapter 6. A Revelation in the Drawing Room. The following morning dawned grey and cold. Wraithmoor Hall stood still, as though it too sensed what was coming. In its long tangled history, the manor had seen its share of scandal, whispered affairs and quiet tragedies, but few as tangled, and none as deliberately orchestrated as the web Jane had now unravelled. She rose early, dressed with calm deliberation, and summoned Inspector Galloway to her chambers. "It's time," she said simply. "Gather them in the red drawing-room." Galloway looked at her, a mix of wariness and admiration in his tired eyes. "You're sure?" "Quite, but I need everyone present, no exceptions." By noon, the red drawing-room was arranged like a theatre stage. A fire glowed in the hearth, though no one felt its warmth. The guests sat in a semicircle just as they had that first night, when the death card had appeared in Lady Ashcombe's reading. This time, the death card was nowhere to be seen. Lady Elowyn sat rigidly in her high-backed chair, her expression guarded. Vera Chillingham fanned herself, her eyes flicking from face to face. Clara sat with her hands in her lap, pale and silent. Ambrose Vale crossed one leg over the other and fixed Jane with a curious expression, as though anticipating an amusing story. Dr. Greaves stood near the drinks trolley, sipping port. Inspector Galloway stood at the door, arms folded. Jane stepped forward, her voice calm and clipped, her posture straight. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "2 nights ago Sir Cedric Hawthorne was murdered in this house. He was stabbed in the heart, and the death tarot card was placed on his chest, a theatrical flourish designed to confuse the investigation and frighten the household. The next night, Madame Virel was found dead in her room, poisoned, silenced." A low murmur stirred the room. But these deaths were not random. They were pieces of a performance, a well-crafted illusion in which superstition was used as smoke and mysticism as mirrors. But beneath the illusion lies a simple truth, and that truth is this: both victims knew something they were not supposed to know. She walked slowly along the line of seated guests, pausing behind each one in turn. They knew that Clara Ashcombe is not Lady Elowyn's niece, but her stepdaughter, the illegitimate child of Margot Vale, the Ashcombe's former governess, a child whose existence had been carefully woven into the family's tapestry of half-truths and silences. Lord Ashcombe, ashamed of his indiscretion, created a trust, one that passed to Clara only if she married before her 21st birthday. Lady Elowyn's face blanched, but she said nothing. Jane continued. If Clara did not marry in time, the estate would pass to an external beneficiary. That beneficiary was Sir Cedric Hawthorne. She turned, facing Ambrose now. "Your father, Theodore Vale, was the solicitor who managed the Ashcombe estate. You found this out, and you realised something else, that Clara was your half-sister." Gasps echoed around the room. Clara shrank into her chair. Ambrose's smile had vanished. "Go on, Miss Parsons," he said coolly. "You could have told her the truth. Instead, you chose to stage a tragedy." Jane turned to the room. Madame Virel was never simply a mystic. She was a partner, perhaps a former lover, perhaps something more. But she helped you design the illusion. She supplied the tarot cards, the death prop, the duplicate card that was planted in her deck. It was a masterstroke, one that allowed you to create an atmosphere of dread, of inevitability, one that distracted everyone from motive. Ambrose finally spoke. "And the motive, Miss Parsons?" "Greed," she said, "wrapped in righteousness. You believed Clara had no right to inherit. You saw yourself as correcting your father's mistake. And with Sir Cedric out of the way, the inheritance would remain in limbo until Clara's birthday, giving you time to manipulate the next phase." She let the silence hang a moment. "You poisoned Madame Virel because she wanted to stop. She feared the game had gone too far. You promised her no blood would be spilled, but Sir Cedric died, and she threatened to confess." Jane walked to the desk and picked up a small object, a fountain pen. "She left this behind. It's not hers. It's engraved with your initials, A.V. She used it to begin writing a letter the night before she died." Ambrose opened his mouth, but Jane held up her hand. "One more thing. The apothecary key used to retrieve the cyanide was signed out under the initials A.V. The butler confirmed it. Your handwriting matches the logbook." Ambrose looked toward Galloway. "That's enough, I think," said the inspector. "You'll come with me, Mr. Vale." As Galloway stepped forward, Ambrose rose slowly, adjusting his cufflinks with deliberate grace. "Well," he said quietly, "I suppose I should have left the theatre to the professionals." Then he turned to Clara, and his voice softened. "I never meant to hurt you, only to protect what should never have been yours." Clara recoiled as though struck. Ambrose gave Jane a small nod, strangely respectful, then allowed himself to be led away. After he was gone, silence fell over the room once more. Clara stood trembling. "It's true, then, about my mother?" Lady Elowyn rose too, her face full of sorrow. "I raised you as my own. Whatever else may be true, that part was real." But Clara shook her head and fled the room. That evening, Jane stood in the library, gazing out at the moorland. Inspector Galloway joined her. "You were right about him. You saw through the whole act." Jane sipped her tea. "He played his part too well. When people orchestrate a lie with that much precision, they usually leave fingerprints." Galloway nodded. "You've done good work here, Miss Parsons, as always." "I only regret arriving too late to prevent the first murder, and the second." "You stopped a third." Jane looked out at the mist curling around the trees. "Yes," she said quietly, "but Wraithmoor Hall will never quite be the same." And with that, the tarot deck was packed away. The death card at last was returned to its proper place, no longer a symbol of fear, only a card, a piece of cardboard in a game of illusion. And Jane Parsons? She boarded the morning train to London, another mystery tucked neatly beneath her hat, and another shadow behind her left on the Devonshire moors.